All right, welcome to these T ROH Show. It's a special edition number 7. Often when we do special editions, it's because there's either information that needs to be given out, and in this case, this particular information needs to be given out due to the fact that the longer that the government of the United States of America holds on to the information, becomes more and more complicit in not telling the people. We've only realized this for the last 4 days, so a special edition was necessary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bore some people with some basic facts, stuff that happened in the 90s that a lot of people don't know about, and I'll just basically go from there. And when you guys, at the end of this, you're going to be extremely shocked, happy in one respect, but shocked and sickened in another respect. So just bear in mind that's basically what's going to be happening here. So I'm going to be sharing screens. I'm going to start out in a particular place wherein it does it read that Flake rebuts Trump, says U.S. doesn't have a sick or rigged system. And you notice that Trump has been saying this over and over again, but he's not really given details. It's rigged against you. And when he says sick system, this is Flake came out. This is Jeff Flake. This is not a sick system, nor is it rigged a system. Let's not sow distrust in our democratic institutions. Okay. So they're coming out and now they're saying it's not a sick system. And then they're moving towards moving a lot of the federal agencies or whatever in other parts of the country outside of Washington, D.C., which is a problem. Now, the reason why this is being brought up is because what you're about to know and understand, this has been a argument for a very long time. The problem is the diagnosis. The diagnosis is the issue. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a map. A lot of people don't know this. So I'm going to basically state it. This is the Philippines right here. This is Guam, Northern Mariana Islands. Okay. Now that's over by Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, China. It's China here. If you go across the Pacific Ocean, you'll see Japan and North Korea and South Korea over there. Let me go ahead and put, I'll make this quicker. Okay, and it'll move right over to the U.S. Virgin Islands. That's down here. This is the British Virgin Islands here. This is San Juan, Puerto Rico, right here. And this is where the hurricanes came up. There's Cuba, there's Bahamas, and there's Florida. Okay, so it's really not that far from what we're talking about. This is the U.S. Virgin Islands here. Please keep this in mind, right here. Keep this area in mind, right there, U.S. Virgin Islands. Okay, now all these are considered what they call U.S. territories. If you go into their titles, you'll notice that it has District of Columbia, Guam, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, all that. Now here, these are what they call the states of the Union. Okay, and then over here you'll have D.C. in this area, and then you'll have New York, and Manhattan Island is up in here. So be up in this area. Manhattan Island's around there. You got Rhode Island there and all that. Okay. So this is what they call the 40 or I don't necessarily always include Alaska and Hawaii. I like to keep it at 48 states of the Union. Okay, so this is the states of the Union. So now that you have a full picture of this, what we can do is now we have the terms in place. Okay, And keep in mind that Flake said this is not a sick system. Okay, now this particular website here, this was freedomclubusa.com, talks about specifics about the Internal Revenue Code. This is not a program about taxes, has nothing to do with taxes. Just keep that in mind. It really has nothing to do with constructive fraud, which you're going to see a lot of that in here. What we've noticed is there is a misdiagnosis of the condition that U.S. citizens are under when they call themselves U.S. citizens. Now, keep in mind that I'm going to get into this, the Federal Alcohol Administration Act of 1935 was declared unconstitutional in 1935, and the operation thereafter transferred offshore to Puerto Rico. So we know where Puerto Rico is. The name of the Bureau of Internal Revenue was changed to the Internal Revenue Service in 1953. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, a division of the Internal Revenue Service, was seemingly separated from IRS TO 120-01, June 6, 1972. In a relevant part, the order reads as follows. The purpose of this order is to transfer, as specified herein, the functions and powers and duties of the Internal Revenue Service arising under law relating to alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, explosives, including the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the Internal Revenue Service, to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, hereinafter referred to as the Bureau, which is hereby established. The Bureau shall be headed by the Director of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, here referred to as the Director. Okay. Now, I went in and they said it was referred above. I went in and checked a lot of these titles, and these were for listing a Philippines trust. They were there. Okay. I'll leave this link at the bottom here. And this particular document was presented in court by a defendant listed when he was challenged by the IRS. The judge in the case read the defendant's notice document and dismissed the case. So there was a very good reason why that case was dismissed. So IRS identity and principle of interest. It goes into the Internal Revenue Service, was created by a stroke of a pen when the Secretary of the Treasury changed the name of Bureau of Internal Revenue. Humphrey, Secretary of Treasury, July 1953. However, no congressional or presidential authorization for making this change has been located. So the source of authority had to originate elsewhere. Research to which IRS officials have acquiesced suggests that the Secretary exercises authority as trustee of the Puerto Rico Trust, number 62, Internal Revenue. Okay, C 31 USC 1321. That was 1322. This is, I believe, 1321, and it in fact is there. Okay, so I went and checked all this before I started the program. So it is there. So that's accurate. Operated as Secretary of Treasury of Puerto Rico. These guys are on the right track. And it says it was based on some research by William Cooper. It says the solid link between the Internal Revenue Service and Department of Treasury Puerto Rico was first published in September 1985 issue of Veritas magazine, based on research by William Cooper and Wayne Benson, both of Arizona. In October, a criminal complaint was filed in the office of W.A. Drew Edmondson, Attorney General for Oklahoma, against Enid-based revenue officer. And in time since, IRS principals have failed to refute the allegation that the IRS is an agency of the Department of Treasury, Puerto Rico. In November, criminal complaints were filed simultaneously with the grand jury for the United States District Court for the District of Northern Oklahoma, Tulsa, and the Office of the Attorney General, Edmondson. Both the Office of the United States Attorney and IRS principals have yet to rebut the allegations that in that instance, United States of America versus Kenny F. Moore, by consulting. Okay. Then Title 31, or it says Chapter 3, Title 31 of the United States Code, one finds the IRS and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms are not listed as agencies of the United States Department of the Treasury. The fact that Congress never created a Bureau of Internal Revenue is confirmed by publication register of 36 FR, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this thing came out of nowhere, folks, just completely out of nowhere. And once you see the whole picture at the end of this, it's going to be make all the sense in the world to everybody that's listening. Okay, the problem here is that Congress promulgated the act in 1935, and the same year, the United States Supreme Court declared the act unconstitutional. The administration of the act was subsequently moved offshore, so that's where it started. Um, Now, a lot of this was done, and this is the William Cooper claim. Now, if anybody knows Bill Cooper, he was a naval um, security, I think, agent or officer, and he was able to see a lot of the real paperwork that has been hidden for a long time. And his family has been in the military for a long time. They ended up killing him. He got in an altercation with the local sheriff, and they ended up shooting him and killing him, which was, not good. So, but a lot of people knew that it was going to be coming anyways. So here in his, it says that in June 1972, Acting Secretary of the Treasury Charles E. Walker signed the Treasury Order number 120-1, which established the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. He did this with a stroke of his pen, citing by virtue of the authority vested in me as Secretary of the Treasury, including the authority and reorganization plan. So this information is verified with this information, which is verified over here. So that everybody knows that a lot of this information is in fact verified. Now, I ended up finding a PDF, which is extremely interesting, um, that started talking about what a U.S. citizen is and where it comes from. People were supposed to be considered citizens of the United States. And everybody knows that when you change a term, you have changed the character and nature of the term. Any wording would change it. Any different spelling, like different capitalization, things like that, changes the, unless it's the title of a book, by the way, but it changes the character of the entity that's being created. So, in fact, what's happened is that under the corporate charter of the federal corporate charter, it used to be called the Citizens of the United States, Congress of the United States. Um, what was it? House of Representatives, I think, was the Congress of the United States of America. All these things. Then it turned into U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Congress. All these things were changed, and nobody even knew where the hell it came from. How all of a sudden did the whole name of these entities change overnight? And it happened. A lot of it happened through a lot of this. Okay, so Walker seemed to branch the Internal Revenue Service, creating the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms (BATF), and then that, with that statement, joined them back together into one. The Federal Register, Volume 41, Number 80 of Wednesday, September 15, 1976, we find the term Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division has been replaced by the term Internal Revenue Service. And we keep this, the gift of the Magi. This was coming from Cooper. This is how the Magi perform magic. It says Secretary Humphrey, with no authority, creates an agency of the Department of Treasury called Internal Revenue Service out of thin air from an offshore pure trust. Make sure that you remember that, called Bureau of Internal Revenue. The settlor and beneficiaries of the trust are unknown. The trustee is the Secretary of the Treasury. Acting Secretary Walker further launders the trust by creating, from the alleged Internal Revenue Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And this is where they come in and start saying that the person becomes a thing. Because they basically stated the terms Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and Commissioner of Internal Revenue, wherever used in regulations, rules, and instructions, and forms issued or adopted for the administration and enforcement of the laws specified in paragraph 2 hereof, which are in effect or in use of the effective date of this order, shall be held to mean the Director. So all of a sudden, somebody's with a name now is called the Director. That's what they mean by that. All right. Now, this is the weird part. The Federal Alcohol Act was ruled unconstitutional within the 50 states. So it was transferred to the BIR, which is an offshore trust. That's Bureau of Internal Revenue, which became the IRS, which gave birth to the BATF, and somehow the term Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, which is a person within the BATF, spawned the alleged Internal Revenue Service via another flick of the pen on September 15, 1976. In a brilliant flash of logic, Wayne C. Benson determined that he could check these facts by filling a Freedom of Information Act request, asking the BATF to name the person who now administers the Federal Alcohol Act. If we were wrong, then a reply would state that no record exists to any name of any person who administers the act. The request was submitted to the BATF. The reply on July 14, 1994, from the Secret Service, an unexpected source, which discloses a connection we had not suspected. The reply states that John Magaw of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms of the Department of the Treasury administers the Federal Alcohol Act. You may remember from Waco hearings that John Magaw, I'm going to call it that, is a director, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. All the research was confirmed by that admission. Okay, so they start going in and start claiming constructive fraud. You guys have no jurisdiction. What are you doing? Blah, 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 blah. And it goes on. Here's the BATF in Puerto Rico. It goes on and on. And it says, where's the IRS? Where is the alleged Internal Revenue Service? Internal Revenue Code of 1939, aka Internal Revenue Code of 1954, 27 CFR, blah, 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 blah. Administered by the Internal Revenue Service, alias Bureau of Internal Revenue, alias Virgin Islands, Bureau of Internal Revenue, alias Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, alias Internal Revenue Service. It's all over the place. So somebody simply created a private trust. Now it says here, or keep specific records. Here, I'll read this from the beginning. According to 26 CFR sections 1.6001 records, no one is required to keep records or file returns unless specifically notified by the district director by notice served upon him. To make such returns, render such statements, or keep such specific records as will enable the district director to determine whether or not such person is liable for tax under subtitle A of the code, blah, 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 blah. 26 CFR states that this rule includes state individual income tax. Then they say, don't get yourself all lathered up, because state means the District of Columbia, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, territories, and insular possessions. That's their term of state. Okay, then there was another video, Freedom to Fascism, that said, where's the law that says that if people need to fill out the 1040, blah, blah, blah. Through the whole thing, they couldn't find that law. It's a very good reason why all this happened and what is happening to everyone today. Now, 44 USC says that every regulation or rule must be published in the Federal Register. It also states that every regulation or rule must be approved by the Secretary of the Treasury. There is no regulation, then there is no implementation of the law. There is no regulation governing failure to file a return. No computer code for failure to file. The only thing we could find was a requirement stating where to file an income tax return. It can be found in 26 CFR, which states that income tax returns are required to be filed with the Director of International Operations. Who is the Director of International Operations? No one in government is allowed to do anything unless they have been given specific written authority in the law, or else someone who has been given authority in the law gives that person a delegation of authority order, spelling out exactly what they can and cannot do under that specific order. We combed the Department of the Treasury's handbook of delegation of orders, and we found that no one in the IRS or BATF has any authority to do most of the things they have been doing for years. Okay, and keep in mind, the government of the United States of America has no issues with the Internal Revenue Service at the moment. The Criminal Investigation Division enforces the criminal statutes applicable to income, estate, gift, employment, and excise tax laws involving United States citizens residing in foreign countries and non-resident aliens subject to federal income tax filing requirements by developing information concerning alleged criminal violations thereof. evaluating allegations and indications of such violations to determine investigations to be undertaken, and it's just a bunch of rigmarole, blah, 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 blah. That's called doublespeak. And that's based in trust law. It's doublespeak. Okay, responsible for operation of comprehensive enforcement and assistance programs for all taxpayers under the immediate jurisdiction of the Assistant Commissioner, International. Direct the full range of collection activity and delinquent accounts and delinquent returns for taxpayers overseas in Puerto Rico and in the United States possessions and territories. 50 states not included. Okay, now this gets worse. Executes the full range of collection activities on delinquent accounts, which includes securing delinquent returns involving taxpayers outside the United States and those in the United States territories, possessions, and in Puerto Rico. I think I've made my point. It goes on and on like this over and over. You'll see it here. You'll see it here, which was freedomclubusa.com, IRS exposed. You'll find that payments of unclaimed trust funds, amounts, and the refunds and refund of amounts erroneously deposited. Okay, and this deals with unclaimed monies of individuals whose whereabouts are unknown. Keep that in mind also. Unclaimed monies of individuals whose whereabouts are unknown. This was a case that they were talking about, I was looking up, and the case was about the controlling question of whether Leslie D. Pickney, the liquor properties manager for Iowa Beer and Liquor Control Department, was a public officer. One of the meaning of 73910 and 73911, the Code 1975. If not, charges against various defendants will not stand. The trial court held that Pickney was not a public officer and re-agreed. This was in Iowa. So under this case here, it's showing that State versus Pickney, and this was done in 1979, that people that are involved in liquor, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms within the states of the Union are not public officers. It didn't create any office. So if it didn't create any office, it doesn't exist. So what is happening? There was the Philippines. We covered that. This was 26 USC. This was an oversight board that they created. And this was a membership right here. This was under 267802, Internal Revenue Service Oversight Board. Okay, now whenever you see the word membership, it could be a private membership association. An oversight board is nothing more than a division of a trust or private membership association, unless it so designates that this is a public trust, and it didn't designate that in here. Okay, so one member shall be the Secretary of the Treasury, if Secretary so designates the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. So this is private trust involved that created this thing. No one knows who wrote it. No one knows who the beneficiaries are. No one knows anything. I kind of know who did it, but that's just without seeing the documents themselves, I can't necessarily prove it. Okay, and this was another section of it. It says requirements before any permit required by Section 5271 is granted, the Secretary may require a bond in such form. And if they require a bond in such form and amount as he may prescribe to ensure compliance with the terms of the permit and provisions of this chapter. Okay, no bond shall be required in the case of permits issued to the United States or any governmental agency thereof, or to the several states or any political subdivision thereof, or to the District of Columbia. Okay, so there's no bonds required in any permits or anything of that nature. What is going on? How are they able to do this? And people will say, well, that's fraud. They're going to start pointing their fingers. This is fraud. This is constructive fraud. This is this. This is that. That's not what it is. There's actually no fraud really going on in any way, shape, or form in what they're doing with the BATF and Internal Revenue Service. Okay, now this is somebody else's research on this. I found I don't necessarily agree with all of it and the terms that they're using, but we'll get into that. Okay, so somehow somebody found a constitution for the United States of America and then one of the United States of America and blah 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 blah. It doesn't really matter on that issue because the 1789 we've already talked about was passed by a secret society. If it's passed by a secret society, it really wouldn't have any standing anyways. So why go into that whole issue? That's the whole deal. So I'll read some of this, but I'll do some corrections as I'm reading. By birth, we are each a citizen of the state of California or the citizen of the state of Arizona or a citizen of whatever union state wherein we were born. At the same time, we are all citizens of the United States of America. Put that in the uppercase T and you got something. That's called American National. That's the original 1781. And are not subject to any acts of Congress other than 18 powers specifically enumerated in the Constitution for the United States of America. That would not be correct either. Okay, now, people who are born who reside within the Federal District of Columbia, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Northern Mariana Islands, any territory on any naval base or dockyard within ports or within insular possessions are called U.S. citizens and are subject to the acts of Congress. That we can agree with. If you were born in Ohio or Iowa or Utah, you are not a U.S. citizen in any way, shape, or form. Not even close. But were you told that when you hit the 1040? Oh, you need to file your taxes. You can't work unless you file your taxes. You can't do this unless you do this. You got to have a social security number. All these other things. And now they're forcing it. They won't even give you a passport unless you say you're a U.S. citizen. They are forcing that. So what we're saying then is people who are born who reside within the Federal District of Columbia, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Northern Mariana Islands, any territory on any naval base or dockyard within forts or within insular possessions are called U.S. citizens and are subject to the acts of Congress. Within the law, words have meanings that are not the same meanings that are accepted in common usage. Then it comes into, of course, our Constitution is a Constitution, and it's not. The U.S. Constitution is the Constitution of Puerto Rico. Okay? Now you go into all these terms here, and it starts saying that, and a lot of people are thinking, I'm going to go one way, and I'm not. We are subject to the laws of the jurisdiction which we volunteer to accept. In the law governing income tax, income is defined as foreign earned income, offshore oil well or windfall profits or war profits. A return is prepared by a taxpayer to submit a federal government taxes that he or she collected. Taxpayer is one who collects taxes and submits the taxes as a return to the federal government. Employee is one who is employed by a federal government. The employer is the federal government. When you have an employer, that means a private company. The individual is a citizen of Guam or the U.S. Virgin Islands. Right here. A business is defined as government, a bank, or insurance company. A resident is an alien citizen of Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, or Puerto Rico, who resides within one of the 50 states of the Union known as the United States of America or one of the other island possessions. That should have a capital T there. The Form 1040 is the income tax return for a non-resident alien citizen of the U.S. Virgin Islands, residing in one of the 50 states of the several states of the Union known as the United States of America, lower uppercase T, capital T. If you volunteer, you are a U.S. citizen. If you have become a U.S. citizen, now, if you volunteer, this is not true. This is not, absolutely not true. you have become a U.S. citizen. That is not true either. If you write or print your name in a line labeled taxpayer, you have become a taxpayer. That's not true either. Since these forms are affidavits which you submit under penalty of perjury, you commit a crime every time you fill out and sign, stating that you are what you are not. That is not true. Now, and the part that's not true is I agree with the forms are affidavits. Yes, they are. Then they say you're committing a crime. You are not committing a crime by filling out one and signing it. The federal government is delighted by your ignorance and will gladly accept your returns and your money. As proof, refer to the Virgin Islands Tax Guide, which states, all references to the district director or the commissioner of internal revenue should be interpreted to mean the director of the Virgin Islands Bureau of Internal Revenue. I've already shown you a map of where that is. All references to the Internal Revenue Service, the Federal Depository, and similar references should be interpreted as BIR, Bureau of Internal Revenue, and so forth. Any questions in interpreting federal forms for use in the Virgin Islands should be referred to the BIR. So people are going to be asking, okay, what I said I was a U.S. citizen. So what am I? That's where the problem lies. What are you? Okay. Now, a lot of people, I don't think I did any yellow highlight for anything, but I'm going to say this again. If you are not within the Virgin Islands trust, you are not a U.S. citizen. That's where the problem lies. So what's happening? Let's go back and look at it again. A Form 1040 is an income tax return for a non-resident alien citizen of the U.S. Virgin Islands, residing within one of the 50 states of the several states of the Union, known as, that would be capital, the United States of America. That was the original Union, and it stays that way, whether anybody likes it or not. If you volunteer, you are a U.S. citizen. Not true. Guess what happened to you, folks? You were trafficked. You were trafficked on paper. If you volunteer, you are a U.S. citizen. You never volunteered because how many people can work without filling out a 1040? You can't. It doesn't work that way unless you're working for cash. Then you're considered a criminal. So if you write or print your name on a line labeled taxpayer, you have become a taxpayer. Not true. You were trafficked. Your person on paper has been trafficked to the U.S. Virgin Islands and then called a U.S. citizen under that trust. That trust took over and started calling the Congress the U.S. Congress and the U.S. House of Representatives. It's all working under a private trust where nobody knows who the beneficiaries are, papacy, and nobody knows who wrote the trust, Masonic Lodge. So they came in and they started showing, they trafficked everybody out of the several states of the Union. Even if you were born in the state of California or you were born in Utah and you start saying that you're a state citizen, they start calling you a domestic terrorist sovereign citizen to force you to traffic or to be trafficked over to an island down in the Atlantic into a private trust so that the Masonic temples could take over the states of the Union. So they sent all their private membership associations and private clubs, the Vatican did, through the, what was that called? The Holy Sepulchre that we've talked about a bunch of times of Jerusalem. They transferred everybody to a private trust in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Here, they traffic children. They traffic babies because babies get an SSN automatically under Title 42, Section 666, and traffic them offshore. And then where were we? They were collecting money um, after they trafficked you to unclaimed monies of individuals whose whereabouts are unknown. That's so they could steal, take all the take everything you have, make you stateless because you're actually your person, and it's not. Everybody has this argument it's a corporation, but it's not. It's just a person. And this person was transferred offshore to the U.S. Virgin Islands. Some were transferred to Guam because some people were actually or were showing in their individual master files. If I can find that, I'll do that. That they were, in a distillery. Some were selling weapons down in South America. Some all kinds of weird stuff. And they couldn't figure out what was going on because everything was based under code. If I can find it, this is some of the stuff that they found. This was also some of the same thing that other people had found too. It was the same stuff over and over and over again. But if I can find it, I'll have to. And it actually has a lot to do with the China Trade Act too, and that I think that one goes through Guam. There's Philippines Trust. This was actually trust number 62. Um, then they had the Lincoln's war tax. It went on and on and on. So, folks, everyone in this country has been trafficked. Everyone. Now, when I mean trafficked, I mean trafficked. When you do, it's called trafficking of persons. It's an international crime. So, trafficking of persons has two different things. It's either for when they call it trafficking of persons, and notice that all the so-called human rights commissions in this country are very specific in where they can do things. Um, they they basically state that it's for prostitution, child sex slaves and things like that. But it's also when you traffic somebody, it's with the intent to enslave. And it is so messed up. It's unbelievable. It made me sick the other night when I started looking into this because if none of this was created by the so-called company, they didn't create any of it. If I can find it, I will. Um, oh, here it is. When Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed for the individual master file (IMF) for people who are experiencing tax problems with the IRS, every return, and this is absolute fact, has been found to contain the above codes, except for some which are coded as Guam returns. Every return shows that the unsuspecting citizen is being taxed on income derived from importing narcotics, alcohol, tobacco, or firearms into the United States, or one of its territories or possessions from a foreign country, or from Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, or into Virgin Islands from the Cayman Islands. That is an absolute fact. Because listed as the code, it says here all references to the District of Director. Okay, the Internal Revenue Service Publication 6209 computer codes for IRS TC 150 is listed as the code for Virgin Island returns. And the codes 300 through 398 are listed as US UK tax treaty claims involving taxes on narcotics, which were financed in the Cayman Islands and imported into the Virgin Islands. So if you are a US citizen, what they do is in your papers and effects, they put these codes in there. And when they put these codes in there, they have you listed somewhere else doing another activity. They're telling the rest of the world that all U.S. citizens are somehow a part of, or U.S. or a part of the Virgin Islands or the Cayman Islands or something of that nature. And this is a fact. I've seen a couple of these myself. So everyone's individual master file at the Internal Revenue Service lists them as one of these types of things, which is citizens being taxed on income derived from importing narcotics, alcohol, tobacco, or firearms into the United States or one of its territories or possessions from a foreign country, or from Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, or into the Virgin Islands or from the Cayman Islands. That's what this is. But guess what? You can't work without an SSN and you can't work without a 1040. That's called human trafficking. It's done on paper. Your birth certificate says, and this is why it can't be used as an identification, if anybody realizes this, your birth certificate cannot be used as an ID card in any way, shape, or form. You first have to be trafficked to this trust somewhere here, and then this trust turns around and issues a Homeland Security identification. So that's why you can't do anything without what? Without their SSN, without their Homeland Security ID card. You can't open a bank account unless you're an 8BEN, which just means you open up a company down in some other country and then try to open up an account here or something of that nature. So everybody has been working diligently for the last 30 years to get around this stupid trust, not realizing. We've heard them say it's constructive fraud. We've heard them say it's fraud here, fraud there. It's not fraud. It's human trafficking. That's crime. That is a crime. So when you have a judge sitting there saying, you're a U.S. citizen because that's what my board says, that's human trafficking. He's nothing more than a trustee for this trust that they created for the Virgin Islands or Cayman Islands. You've been trafficked and you're considered a foreigner. They started creating the federal zones. They started doing all this other stuff they call the zone improvement plan under this same trust. So it's a charitable trust is what it is. They call them pure trusts, some are charitable trusts. And they've expanded this and they slowly changed all of the terms over and over and over. Little bit here, little bit there, slowly moved it in and trafficked everybody offshore. Brought in their Masonic lodges that were actually already there and have been there since the beginning and put them in charge. Made you a foreigner to your own country. And this is, we went through all the states. None of the courts anywhere, state or federal or anywhere, will give you an oath or affirmation to your state as a state citizen. So this is what the the government of the United States of America does, because we had to go before all this happened in order to be able to do this. All right, let me go ahead and share screens. So what we do is when you do a resident declaration within the United States of America, that's uppercase T, the United States of America, because that's what this original union came from. We move your person, we deliver your person either from Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands down here, or Guam, wherever they may be, back to the states of the Union. And you use a NAC code because we don't know how far this trust expands. So we use a NAC code, which is outside of any political boundaries, because you have a country full of trafficked U.S. citizens that are citizens of the U.S. Virgin Islands down here. This is the British Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands. And most people originally thought that they were in D.C. or Manhattan Island. That's where it's all being administered from. The only ones that are not trafficked are those that were born in Washington, D.C., because they're still there. They still don't have any rights. Okay, so if you were born in Missouri or you're born in Illinois and you got a birth certificate to prove it, you cannot be, it is absolutely impossible for you to be a U.S. citizen unless you filled out one of their forms and there's a presumption that you were. But in fact, since you did not know anything about this trust and you don't know the terms and conditions of it, you are in fact trafficked. And I know for a fact that the local, state, and federal judges do not have jurisdiction over anyone unless they're U.S. citizens. That means all of them joined in with this trust with the U.S. Virgin Islands. And they are involved in trafficking. When they're forcing you to get a driver's license without the intangible property rights being transferred to them, that is a part of their trust agreement. And they're still they're trafficking you into the U.S. Virgin Island Trust, way offshore. I mean, that sucker is way down here, folks. It's right in this area here. So instead of calling it constructive trust, instead of calling it fraud, and instead of doing anything, call it what it is: human trafficking of persons. So when you do a resident declaration, we move you back to your states, back into the states of the Union through the government of the United States of America. We are doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. I wanted to share this with everyone so that you understand that any other kind of argument anywhere is not the correct argument. The correct argument is human trafficking. And the government of the United States of America has witnessed against it and are doing something about it to change it. We wanted you to know that. We've been showing you this for quite a long time. And now you understand. In one of our shows, we were talking about U.S. citizen being a part of a demonic order. Now you understand how demonic it is, how disgusting it is. And now you know why Trump is not being very clear about it, by the way. The fact that it's sick, and he's right, it is sick. We do agree with that. But he can't necessarily come out, if he does know it, he can't necessarily come out and say, every one of you have been trafficked, because his office is just as guilty. His treasury is just as guilty for involving themselves in this private trust. We all know where it came from. That came from the papacy. Now what the papacy is trying to do is they're trying to bring in, take everybody's property rights away from them and only arm the Masonic orders and temples and all these different organizations that they have, only arm them, and then the people have nothing. And the only way to take away your rights is to traffic you, to make you a stateless person within these states. You're a stateless person here. You've been trafficked down here. That's why they can have plausible deniability. They say, oh yeah, you're a U.S. citizen. You have citizenship. You don't know who the trustees are. The public offices were never created. When the judges are implementing U.S. citizens, that public office was never created. Ever. It doesn't exist. So they had to bring in the charter of the judges, or charter of the judge, from Vatican City. So all these things that we've been doing through all the shows, this will probably be the one that will answer all your questions on what is happening, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. And anybody that wants to call it fraud, they're trafficking. They're human traffickers. And they did it to their own people. That's the sick part. They're doing it to their own people. They were born here, raised, brought into that system, and started trafficking all their own people without knowing it. That's sick, folks, and that'll make you puke. It's almost, and what I was thinking about before, it's almost like watching a zombie movie where one guy gets caught. He starts. I mean, it's almost like they're kind of telling you. He gets infected. He bites somebody else. They get infected. They bite somebody else. That gets infected. It's over and over and over. And they've created this false narrative of a allegiance to a company flag. But the facts are the facts. You've been human trafficked. You call yourself a U.S. citizen. Go look at your if you think that I'm wrong, go look at your Constitution. It's supposed to be a citizen of the United States. When you change that term, it all starts making sense. All these terms were changed out of nowhere. Just happened. It all happened after the 1933 pledge of Roosevelt. May 5th, I think it was May 5th, 1933. They removed everybody from the states of the Union. Now you know why you don't have any rights. You're trafficked. Thank you for listening to the T ROH Show, special edition number 7. Hope that you learned something. Please don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. We do appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next week.